Now, folks, I don't think those people are being honest with themselves. I have a hard time imagining orgasm of the body without pictures in the mind. And if there are pictures in the mind, and I heard somebody just recently say, well, yeah, they get them, but they try to fight them off. Well, the fact is, they're involved in something that's bringing them in. They're involved in something that's bringing them in that would even force them to have to fight it off. They're opening the door to invite these things to come in. Now let me just ask you guys something, because I know this is especially a problem there. You start taking images of a lady, some young lady in your mind. What are you going to do? Walk out the door here and go evangelize her? How are you going to respect people of the opposite sex when you use them that way? And that's what it is. Even if it's just an image of them that you have in your mind. You're going to use people of the opposite sex that way? Folks, this idea that people can be involved in this kind of activity and they're not sinning in thought. I'm not going to be here and say, I've been in all your minds and I know every circumstance, and I'm going to say it's impossible. I'm not going to say that. I can't dogmatically say that. But I know, and you know, that to be involved in that type of thing without images in your mind, and Jesus Christ says this is a matter of life and death. And people can try to justify, but I'm telling you, this is a matter of life and death. If you're going to try to justify this, I would tread very, very carefully. Because Christ is talking about lustful intent in the mind and being thrown into hell. Don't play with this thing. And just on that note, I've heard some guys try to say, well, this is how they try to cope with sexual temptation. Wait a second. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, flee from sexual immorality. Flee from it. And even the guys that say they try to use masturbation to kind of take the edge off so that they won't fall into sexual temptation. Look, if the same guys admit that they're also being attacked by images in their mind that they have to fight off, I would just ask the question, is masturbation running from sexual immorality, or is it running into it? Are you fighting against it, or are you inviting it? That's just something to ask. Now turn in your Bibles to Hebrews 13:4. Because I also want you to see this passage. Hebrews 13:4. Again, this is another text I think we really, really need to take seriously. Hebrews 13:4. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. Now, you know what's so interesting about this passage? You have one thing that God honors, which is what? What is honorable? The marriage bed. And the writer of Hebrews runs right from what is honorable to what is dishonorable. And it's as though there's no middle ground here. The marriage bed is honorable. And then right after that, isn't it amazing that he jumps right into God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic here, but it's as though the writer is implying what? Everything aside from the marriage bed, as far as sexual outlet goes, falls into the category of sexual immorality and adultery. And if you're going to say you found some secret little middle ground that isn't covered there, again, I tell you, you better tread carefully. Because just like in the other one, we had hell threatened, we have God's judgment threatened. This is not a small matter, folks. Don't think you can toy with this and be wrong without it costing you much. Let's go further. I want you folks to turn to 1 Corinthians 6:12. And again, I think it's so interesting here. Here's Paul's words to the Corinthians. It's so interesting, his context. It's almost as though it's written just for us to give consideration to just these kind of things. 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. Now watch this. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be enslaved by anything. Food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will raise us up by His power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with Him. Flee from sexual immorality. Isn't it interesting where Paul's saying, I won't be enslaved to anything? It's right in this whole context of fleeing sexual immorality. Let me tell you this. When Paul tells us how he lives, you are under commandment of God to imitate him as he imitates Christ. Have you ever heard him say that? Paul calls us to imitate his example repeatedly. Now listen, being brought under the power of anything is basically what? I mean, we might look at it as idolatry. But here's the thing that Paul says. He wouldn't be brought under the power of anything. As Christians, we have a responsibility not to be brought under the power of anything. Look, where you've got a guy saying, well, I need to do this. You know what he's basically saying? What is he confessing to? What's he admitting? He's a slave. He's brought under the power of it. Paul says, I will not be enslaved by anything. You know what? Once in a while my wife cuts coffee out. You know why? To show she's not enslaved to it. Once in a while I'll say, you know what? I'm going on a sweets fast, soda fast for the next 3 months or whatever. I'm not touching it. Why? The Apostle Paul said this, I discipline my body. I keep it under control, lest after preaching to others. Now listen to this again. I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified or rejected or cast away. You see what Paul's saying again? This is a life and death matter. Paul says, I keep myself disciplined, lest when this is all done, and I've preached the truth to others, I end up a castaway. Young men, are you keeping your body disciplined? Are you keeping yourself unenslaved? Do you have control of your body? The Apostle Paul tells us to imitate him. Are you imitating him here? Can you tell your body no to any physical appetite anytime and keep it under control. That's what Paul did. And that's what he calls us to do. To imitate him. To follow him as he follows Christ. Boy, let's go here. Jesus Christ said, "Follow me. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Now listen to this. Jesus Christ says in order to follow him, what do you have to do? You have to deny yourself.